Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel, Gardening Cold Spring Harbor. Welcome back to Long Island, New York, Zone 7A. Today guys, I am not in my home garden. Today I came to a friend's house, to his home garden. Why? Because he has reached out to me with a concern in regards to his tomato plants over here. He said that he's been noticing that something has been happening to his tomato plants. The tomato plants have started to wilt. The leaves have started to yellow, as you could see over here. And he asked me to desperately come over and help save his tomato plants. When I asked him to send me pictures of his tomato plants so I can evaluate the situation to see what is happening, once I saw the pictures, I knew right away that I had to come over here as soon as possible and save these beautiful tomato plants. So here we are, guys. I am here helping a friend out to save his tomato plants. Are your tomato plants looking sick? Are they possibly dying? Then in today's video, I might have a solution for you. In today's video, we're going to focus on identification and treatment of tomato disease, as well as we're going to attempt and try to rescue this gorgeous, beautiful, large tomato plant over here at my good friend's home garden. So what do you guys do when you can clearly see that your tomato plant is struggling? Do you know the cause of this? Is it the soil composition? Is it the lack of watering? Is it a lack of nutrients? Or is it some sort of a disease, guys? Proper treatment always starts with proper identification of the problem. We start growing our tomatoes earlier in the season, but once hot and humid temperatures come around, and this is usually the worst case scenario in the month of August, this is exactly when we start noticing all the problems with our plants. And one of the major problems that usually comes around the month of August is disease. So those of us who live in more hot, humid zones such as Michigan, Florida, and even over here in New York State, we just tend to notice these diseases and have to unfortunately deal with these diseases more often than we want or should. Some of the more common diseases are septoria, leaf spot, and early blight. For those of you or us gardeners who get very unfortunate and unlucky that we might even get the late blight disease on our tomatoes. But that is the worst case scenario, guys. That is the worst disease that your tomato plants can ever get. As your tomato fruits start to ripen, you might actually get another disease, which is called anthracnose. However, the early blight, the leaf spot, and the late blight, those three diseases are foliage diseases. So the foliage disease almost always starts from the bottom of the plant and goes up. Usually it starts from the soil, guys, from the bacteria that is left untreated in the soil from previous year's growth. And this bacteria starts climbing up towards the top portion of your plant until your entire plant gets impacted and infected with these bacterial diseases. And again, they start from the soil. These diseases, the foliage diseases, are soil-borne bacterial diseases. So what happens when these bacterial diseases start to attack our tomato plants? Well, the leaves or the foliage of our tomato plants starts to turn yellow. You might see spots on your tomato plant's leaves. Then soon after that, the foliage starts to turn brown and eventually starts to die out and fall off your tomato plant. These diseases can impact the entire plant, can affect the entire plant in the long run if left untreated. It will not necessarily impact the fruiting of your plant. However, it will impact the sizing of your fruit. Your tomato fruits, instead of being nice and large, will start getting smaller and smaller, and it will impact the overall quality of the fruits on your tomato plant if left untreated. So one easy way to distinguish septoria leaf spots from early blight is by looking at the spots on your tomato plant's leaves. So septoria leaf spots has very distinguishable looking spots. They are usually very small, about 1/8 of an inch, and they're usually scattered throughout the entire leaf, and they almost kind of look like you sprinkled some black ground pepper onto your plant's leaves. So it looks like pepper specks on your plant's leaves. Versus early blight. Early blight spots look much different than septoria leaf spots. The spots are larger. They're wider. They're about 1/2 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch in length and in width. They do not look like pepper specks at all. Here, let me pull up one leaf to show you guys an example. You could see that the spots are wider. They do not look like pepper specks by all means. And also the leaf is turning yellow, followed by brown pigmentation. Early blight is very, very distinct. It is very, very easy to identify. So number one, the spots are about 1/2 to 3/4 in the width and length. Your leaves will start to turn yellow, then will start to turn brown, as you could see over here. And then essentially they will all start to die out. And this is a very clear example of this. If we identify a problem with our tomato plant early enough, we can not only treat it, we can prevent it from ever coming back to our tomato plant again. So as I just said, there's always a checklist when it comes to our plants. When we see a problem, this problem can be due to lack of watering, lack of fertilization, issues with the quality of the soil that we're using. Maybe there is a disease or a pest issues. So again, we need to get to the bottom of what the issue is before we can treat it properly and accordingly. But the first thing I always like to do is to assess the situation. I always want to see the plant in real life and see what is going on. So here I am next to this large, beautiful, fully mature tomato plant. You could see over here, it still has huge, beautiful, unripened tomatoes. So you could see that this plant at one point was very healthy and very happy. So first thing I do is I always evaluate the place, the location where it's growing. I want to make sure that it's a full sun location because tomatoes love full sun. Next, I always look at the foliage, at the leaves. Because remember, pruning is very, very important, and I cannot say that enough, guys, when it comes to tomato plants. Because most bacterial disease, again, are soil borne, and they will spread through those lower leaves as they act almost as bridges for that disease. Disease jumps onto those leaves from the soil, and insects also love using those bottom leaves, the stems, the foliage, as a bridge to climb onto our plants and to start eating it. So if you see any foliage that's touching, or any branches that are touching the soil, the ground, and you can clearly see over here, there are quite a few of those. So this is a first no-no. We want to make sure that this plant is pruned immediately. So let me start with that. I'm going to start pruning the lower branches of this tomato plant to ensure that there's no foliage touching the soil or the ground whatsoever. I'm also going to prune off, using my pruning shears, any and all of the leaves and stems that either look yellow, wilted, or diseased. So now let's get started. So this guy looks yellow. We want to prune it off. Again, guys, we never compost any branches, leaves that might look diseased. Let's take a look here. There are nice tomatoes on this branch, but this branch is lacking support. You could see it's drooping down, touching the ground, and there are more stems and more branches that are turning yellow. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it over here and support the remainder of this nice, thick stem. Garbage. I'm going to ensure that this beauty over here is properly supported. We do not want this touching the ground. Again, any yellowing leaves, gone. Look how much better this branch is starting to look. Guys, by trimming off all the diseased or yellowing foliage, we're also allowing our plant to breathe. The plant needs that spacing between the branching in order for the air to circulate. Circulation of the air prevents and eliminates diseases on our plants. Any browning branches, guys, everything has to go. I want to be very careful because I do not want to damage any healthy stems, any main stems or branches. Again, guys, I will support this beauty over here with the proper support after I'm done with the pruning. Look how much dead foliage I'm actually cutting off, guys. Look at all these branches that were touching the ground over here. They are filled with huge tomatoes, but I just wanted to show you. I lifted up this branch. You could see the dirt and the debris on the leaves. This was all touching the dirt. And where you see the dirt is mainly where you see this yellowing of the leaves and the browning of the leaves as well. So you pretty much could tell that this all started to happen from soil-borne bacteria. So it's clearly not only a lack of pruning the plant, but also a lack of support. All of these branches have not been supported. Only half of the tomato plant has the caging, the support. This half never got the support that it needed. Hence, the branches got long, drooped down, touched the soil, and started to get ill from the soil-borne bacteria. By looking at this brings me to my next very important point, guys. Look at the size of this branch. It weighs a ton. I'm holding this branch with both of my hands. So the next very important and actually crucial point when it comes to growing tomatoes and preventing disease is always providing the proper staking and the proper support for your tomato plants. Remember, they will never stay the same size as when you plant them or transplant. They will grow. So you want to offer that support to the branches because you do not want them to droop down from the weight. I don't know if you guys could see how many tomatoes these branches have. Look at this. Look at those. It's a beautiful plant, but the weight of the fruit brought the branches down. The branches started to touch the soil due to lack of staking and lack of support, hence started to get sick with the bacterial disease, with early blight disease. Guys, take a look at this. How much better This plant is already looking. I pruned off quite a lot of yellow and diseased leaves. Here we are getting towards the middle of the plant. And as I could see, the lower, the deeper I'm getting, I'm seeing more and more yellowing leaves over here. And these yellow leaves are all towards the bottom half of the plant. The upper half of the plant, look at this, guys, is nice and green, has new blooms, tomatoes. So majority of the problem is with the lower portion of the leaves, as well as with the branches that were touching the soil and that were never pruned off. I'm not even fully done pruning this plant, guys. You could see over here how much yellow diseased foliage already cut off. Behind me, you could see how much more circulation this plant is starting to get. Look at this. Look how many leaves and branches I cut off. Look how much more space this tomato plant has to thrive and to grow. Which brings me to the next very important point, is when you are planting your tomatoes earlier in the season, remember about the distance that you're leaving between your tomato plants. You do not want to plant your tomato plants too close to each other. As they will start to grow, the branches will start to overlap, which was the case over here. And disease also started to spread as the leaves don't get the chance to dry out after the rain with the humidity, and even after the watering. You always want to give proper distance between your tomato plants when you're planting them. And I will say it over and over about the support and the staking. Support is absolutely crucial, because as you could see over here, come with me, guys, let me show you. Look what is going on over here. This side of the tomato was clearly lacking the support. Look at all these beautiful large tomatoes. But look at this, they're all laying, absolutely laying on the ground. Look at these heavy tomato branches. You could see how dirty, look at this, look how dirty and wet they are. Guess where this is coming from? This is coming from the soil, from the wet soil that didn't get a chance to dry out and now spread all the disease to this tomato plant. So remember, always stake your tomatoes right away as soon as you plant them. Don't wait till they get this big and the branches get this heavy. Another very important reason for pruning down your tomato plant is, imagine the small size of the plant's root system versus this huge, abundant foliage. So what happens? This root system is now sending all the energy and trying to keep and to support this unneeded, unnecessary foliage, instead of sending the energy into the sizing and the amount of our tomato fruit. So pruning is very, very important, not only for the overall health of our tomato plant, but also to prevent the spread of soil-borne disease. Look at this, guys. This is exactly what I was referring to, disease and pests. So now that I pruned off the leaves and the branches, the yellowing that were touching the soil, I found all these tomatoes laying. You see how dirty they are? Oh my goodness, look. They're all laying on the ground. Look at this. You could see the dirt, you could see how wet they are, and look what is on most of these tomato fruits. A slug, a pest. This is another good reason to always raise the branches to support and to stake your tomato plants. So these guys do not use the leaves or even the fruit as a climbing bridge to attack your plant. Look what else I found crawling. Look, this guy is alive and moving right underneath all that dense, unpruned foliage. A slug, another pest. yet hiding and living in the tomato plant's foliage. So the next step after you're done pruning the diseased or the yellowing leaves off your plant, you want to offer the remaining stems of your tomato plant as much support as you possibly can. I like to use this Velcro. It's a plant and garden safe Velcro. So what I do is I take the stems, lift them up as high as I possibly can, and I offer the remaining stems of my tomato plant as much support as I possibly can. We want to lift these guys up, and believe me guys, they are as heavy as they can get now that they have all this fruit on them. If you guys live in those hotter, more humid climates, gardening zones, unfortunately, most likely you will see a tomato disease crawl into your home garden. And if you don't want your plants looking like this towards the end of August or September, you always want to think ahead and take preventative measures. So spacing of your tomato plants, the staking, the support, the pruning of the bottom leaves, the pruning of any yellowing leaves. We spoke about those. So what is the next step? The next step is to spray down your tomato plant, whether it's a treatment or even as a preventative measure, with these organic approved garden use chemicals. So you can either use copper fungicide, which does miracles and works great against bacterial disease on our tomato plants, or neem oil, or what I like to do is I like to use both when I spray down my tomato plants against bacterial disease. For those of you who do not like to use organic treatments for whatever reason, maybe you feel like they're too weak and don't work, there is a spray, there is a chemical that you can use for non-organic use, and that chemical is called Daconil. It is also widely available, but again guys, that is not an organic chemical. So now that you realize that you live in a human climate and you realize that that disease will most likely creep into your home garden, how often should you treat your tomato plants in order to prevent this bacterial disease? Or how often do you have to spray down your tomato leaves once you realize that the disease already creeped into your home garden, to treat this disease and to prevent it from coming ever back to your home garden? So whether you're using these organic gardening chemicals for preventative measure or as a treatment measure, you want to spray down your leaves, the leaves of your tomato plant thoroughly, like so. You want to spray the top of the leaves, turn your leaves around, spray the bottom of the leaves, as well as the stems and the branches. And remember guys, you do have to be thorough and diligent. When do you know that it's enough? When you see it dripping down off of your plant, whether it's the stem of the leaves. When you see it dripping down, you know that you have applied enough chemicals. So now guys, how often should you reapply it? 7 to 10 days. You should repeat the treatment every 7 to 10 days, unless there has been more than half an inch of rainfall after you have applied this chemical to your plant. So remember guys, if you are doing a heavier pruning job, not just pinching off little leaves here and there like I just did today, try not to do that when there's rain anticipated in the forecast. Why? Because some of the branches that I cut off today were on the larger, thicker side. So remember, by cutting those off, you are essentially exposing a bruise, and you do not want all that rain to get into that bruise and potentially cause another infection. Another very important tip when it comes to growing tomatoes and preventing disease is considering the timing of when you're watering your tomatoes. You do not want to water your tomatoes late in the evening or even at night. Why? Because then the water does not have enough time or enough sunlight to dry out on the foliage of your tomato leaves, hence even further spreading disease on your tomato plants. Try to water your tomatoes as early in the morning as possible, and try to water it from the bottom as close to the root system as possible without splashing the water onto the tomato plant foliage. Last but not least, very, very important aspect to talk about when it comes to growing tomatoes is fertilizing our tomatoes. Fertilization is very, very, very important when it comes to growing healthy tomato plants. The brand of fertilizers I personally like to use are Spom Organic. And again, guys, I'm not associated with them. I'm not trying to market them by any means. I just had a lot and lots of luck and great things happen when I use Spom Organic fertilizers. When I fertilize my tomato plants, I like to use the Spom Organic Tomato Tone fertilizer. This is widely available. They're sold on the internet. They're sold in garden centers. Amazon carries it. Home Depot. Lowe's carries this fertilizer, and it has the perfect amount of nutrition specifically for tomato plants. The perfect ratio of N to P to K, which is exactly what you want. So going back to the use of fertilizer, every fertilizer has a very clear NPK ratio. You see here is an example, the 3 numbers separated by a dash line. So here, the garden food by Spom Organic has a 10 to 10 to 10 ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The higher the number in the NPK ratio is, the higher the concentration is. So the first number, the nitrogen, it's essentially responsible for the rapid growth of our leaves. So most of us gardeners like to use high ratio of nitrogen in the very beginning stages of our plant growth, when we just transplanted our seedlings, or when we bought our seedlings from a garden center. When we just plant them, we do want that high percentage of nitrogen to help boost the healthy leaf growth. So the second number in the ratio, the phosphorus, is responsible for the root growth and for the flower and fruit development, which is also very, very important. And last but definitely not least, the last number in the ratio, the potassium, is responsible for the overall function of the plant, so it performs and grows correctly. For those of you fellow gardeners who are struggling with either getting enough tomato blooms or having the tomato blooms and then they die off like this, turn brown and then fall off, I highly recommend also using bone meal in your fertilization regimens. Bone meal is responsible for getting more blooms, larger blooms, hence more larger fruit. Remember what we said about phosphorus. Phosphorus, the proper amount of phosphorus, is the key to getting lots of blooms and larger blooms. And what do larger blooms mean? Larger blooms mean larger fruit. So the more blooms you have, the more fruit you will essentially have. And by adding bone meal to your regimen, this will prevent your blooms from dying off and falling off your plant. So I highly, highly recommend using this. This is it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for joining me here on this beautiful summer day in Long Island, New York, Zone 7A. Again, today I came to a good friend's house to help rescue his gorgeous tomato plant. And I took you guys on this exciting trip and a garden job with me. We pruned a lot of sick, diseased, and dying branches off. We added extra support to this tomato plant. We sprayed the tomato plant with copper fungicide and neem oil for treatment and for preventative measure. We fertilized my friend's tomato plant. And now we're going to see this tomato plant hopefully recover and continue to grow and do great until the very, very end of the summer season. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me here. Stay healthy, stay happy, be well, guys, and I'll see you again in my new upcoming gardening videos. Bye, guys.